The Velthari did not stand. Not for anyone. Not for any reason. In 11,000 years of recorded history, across 9,000 star systems and the ruins of civilizations they had swallowed whole, the queens of the Velthari Dominion sat. They sat when they judged. They sat when they conquered. They sat when they signed the death orders of entire species. Sitting was not laziness. It was theology. A seated queen meant the universe was in order, settled, controlled. To stand would be to admit that something had unsettled it, that something existed beyond the reach of the throne. Nothing did. Nothing ever had. Princess Saya Velthan had been raised on this fact the way human children are raised on gravity. It was not taught. It was assumed. And, like gravity, she had never thought to question it until the floor disappeared beneath her. The research vessel Kael'Mora was 3 days into a classified xenobiology survey near the Sol quarantine boundary, when everything went wrong at once. Sayari had requested this mission herself. Third daughters did not inherit. Third daughters did not command fleets or negotiate treaties or sit on councils that shaped the fates of worlds. Third daughters were decorative, useful at formal dinners, permitted to pursue academic interests as long as those interests never threatened to become important. She had a gift for biology, for the small and strange and living. Her mother, Queen Moran, had approved the survey mission with the particular warmth reserved for indulging a child's hobby, generous and dismissive in the same breath. So Sayari was 200 light-years from home, cataloging microbial formations near a quarantine star system, when the reactor cascade hit. It started as a hum, a wrong note in the ship's constant low song. The chief engineer reported a fluctuation in the secondary coolant loop. Sayari barely looked up from her samples. Fluctuations happened. They were corrected. The universe was in order. Then the hum became a scream. The cascade ripped through 3 reactor chambers in 9 seconds. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut. The lights died. The gravity shifted, not off, but sideways, as if the ship had decided that down was now a suggestion rather than a law. Sayari hit the wall of her lab. Her sample containers shattered around her, spraying bioluminescent fluid across her face and arms. In the blue-green glow of the spilled samples, she saw her own hands shaking. She had never seen her hands shake before. The attack came during the chaos. The Dreth Communion, a rival faction that had been shadowing the Kael'Mora for days, patient and silent, struck with the kind of precision that left no room for accident. 3 warships, targeted strikes on the engine section, the communications array, the bridge. Not to capture, to kill. Sayari learned later what the attack meant politically. A dead third princess created fractures in Velthari succession. Small ones, but enough. Enough for the Dreth to exploit. Enough for the internal dissidents who had funded the operation to benefit from the confusion. But in the moment, she did not think about politics. She thought about the escape pod at the end of the corridor, and the fact that her legs were not moving fast enough to reach it. She reached it. The pod launched. Behind her, the Kael'Mora broke apart in a bloom of white light that her pod's rear camera captured in terrible detail. The ship folding inward like paper. The bodies of her crew spinning outward into vacuum, small and dark, against the fire. She watched until the camera lost signal. She did not look away. She owed them that. The pod's auto-navigation was damaged, corrupted by the same cascade that had killed the ship. It was supposed to take her to the nearest Velthari outpost, a military station 18 light-years away, staffed and safe and waiting. It did not take her there. The pod's broken brain reached for the nearest habitable planet instead. A small blue world orbiting a yellow star. A world the Velthari had studied for centuries from a distance, the way one might study bacteria through glass. With interest, but never with the intention of touching. Earth, quarantined by Dominion edict, home to a Category 6 species classified as primitive, psychologically unstable, and biologically fragile. The Treaty of Quiet Observation permitted remote study. It forbade contact. It especially forbade crash-landing a royal escape pod in the middle of their territory. The pod did not care about treaties. It entered Earth's atmosphere at an angle that turned the sky into a streak of fire. It crossed over an ocean, then mountains, then flat land that stretched out brown and empty under a pale autumn sky. It hit the ground in a field that had not been planted in 3 years. Dead soil, receiving a visitor from 9,000 star systems away. And it buried itself 8 feet deep, with a sound like the world cracking its knuckles. Sayari opened her eyes. Pain, real and specific. A laceration across her torso, where the restraint harness had cut through her suit during impact. Her blood, pale violet, pooled beneath her in the cockpit seat. The air coming through the pod's cracked hull was wrong. Full of things her lungs did not recognize. Microorganisms her immune system had no name for, no defense against. She could feel them already. Tiny invasions at every point where her skin was broken. Her body's defenses mobilizing against an enemy they could not identify. She had 40 hours, maybe less. Velthari healed fast, but healing required recognizing the threat. Her immune system was swinging its shadows. The distress beacon was transmitting. She could hear its pulse, a high harmonic whine cycling through Veltari emergency frequencies, reaching upward, into a sky where no Veltari ship orbited, no Veltari ear listened. She was alone. Sayari Velthon, third daughter of Queen Moharan, heir to nothing of consequence, had never been alone. Not once. Not ever. From the moment of her birth she had been surrounded by guards, by attendants, by the vast machinery of a civilization that considered her safety a matter of institutional obligation. She had been protected the way a document is protected, not for what she was, for what she represented. Now there was no one, no guard, no attendant, no institution, just a broken pod in a broken field on a planet that did not know she existed. She pressed her hand against the wound on her torso. The violet blood was warm between her fingers. She looked up through the cracked canopy at the alien sky. Pale, enormous, the color of nothing she had a word for. She was going to die here, on a primitive world, in a field that smelled like cold dirt and something sweet she could not name. She was going to die alone, and her mother would sit on her throne and receive the news, and the universe would remain in order. The sound reached her before the light did. An engine, low and rough and mechanical in a way that sounded almost offensive after a lifetime of Velthari engineering. No harmonics, no elegance, just combustion and metal arguing with each other at high volume. A vehicle, primitive, wheeled. It stopped at the edge of the crater her pod had made. The engine ticked, in the cold. A figure stepped out, bipedal, broad across the shoulders. It moved with the kind of economy that came from learning not to waste motion. It walked to the edge of the crater and looked down at her pod. At her. Sayari could not read its face. The species was not in her training. The expression meant nothing to her. But the creature did not move away. It came closer. Eli Marin had not planned on finding an alien in his field. He had planned on checking the fence line along the south pasture, because the wind last night had sounded like it meant to take something down, and the fence was the weakest thing he owned. He had a thermos of coffee on the passenger seat, and a roll of baling wire in the truck bed, and the radio was playing something with a steel guitar that he was not listening to. Then the sky tore open. The streak of fire crossed from east to west, trailing smoke and a sound that was not thunder, but wanted to be. It hit the south field with a force that Eli felt through the truck's chassis. A deep, gut-level thump, like the earth had coughed. He drove toward it because that was what you did. Something falls, you go look. He did not think about it more than that. The crater was maybe 30 feet across, and surprisingly neat. More like something had been pressed into the soil than blown into it. At the bottom sat a shape, metallic, curved, split open along one side like a seed pod that had cracked on impact. Light pulsed from inside, blue-white, rhythmic, a heartbeat made visible. Eli stood at the edge and looked down. Inside the cracked shape, something was alive. Silver-skinned, humanoid in the loosest sense. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, but wrong in every detail. The proportions were too long. The fingers had an extra joint. The skin had a faint luminescence, like moonlight trapped under water. And the blood pooling beneath it was the color of lilac. It was breathing, two-toned, a harmonic, like 2 notes played at once. Eli had never heard a living thing make that sound. He climbed down into the crater. His hands remembered before he did. 26 months of combat medicine in places he no longer named out loud. His hands had held shut wounds that should have killed the men beneath them. His hands had found pulses in mud and dark and noise. They were the only part of him that still worked right. The rest had come home flinching and slow and wrong, but his hands stayed steady. He knelt beside the creature. The laceration across its torso was deep. The violet blood came in pulses, which meant a heart, which meant a circulatory system, which meant pressure and flow and the basic math of keeping a body alive. He pressed his hands to the wound. The creature's eyes opened. They were large, dark, no whites, like looking into 2 drops of ink. They focused on him with an expression he could not read, but his gut translated anyway. Fear and confusion and pain, the 3 things that looked the same in every species that had ever been hurt. It spoke. The sound was layered, a chord, not a word. It vibrated in his jaw and behind his eyes. He understood nothing. "I know," he said. "I know. Hold still." It did not understand him either, but his hands were warm on its wound, and his voice was low and steady, and these things translated without language. The creature stopped struggling, not from trust, from exhaustion. But it was enough. He carried it to the truck, lighter than he expected, maybe 90 pounds. Its skin was cool and smooth under his fingers, like polished stone that breathed. He laid it across the back seat and drove home with one hand on the wheel and one hand holding a wadded shirt against its torso. The farmhouse was not a hospital. It was a 3-bedroom wreck with a leaking roof and a kitchen that smelled like coffee and solitude. But it had a table he could clear, and lights he could angle, and the field medic kit he kept under the bathroom sink, because some habits do not break. He laid the creature on the kitchen table. He cleaned the wound with boiled water and iodine, watching its face for reactions he could read. The iodine made it hiss, both tones at once, a sound like a tea kettle crossed with a violin. He took that as pain and diluted the solution. Stitches were a gamble. He did not know if its skin would hold suture thread. He tried. It held. Different tension than human skin, less elastic, more dense, but it held. The creature watched him work. Those ink-drop eyes tracked his hands with an attention that went beyond the medical. It was studying him, cataloging. He could almost feel the intelligence behind those eyes running calculations he would never be able to follow. "You're smarter than me," he said, tying off a suture. "That's fine. Most things are." The harmonic sound again, softer this time, almost a question. The first night was the worst. Eli sat in a chair beside the kitchen table and watched the creature breathe. The dual-toned rhythm was uneven now, one note lagging behind the other. Its skin, which had been bright silver, was going gray at the edges. Whatever was in the air was fighting it from the inside. He could see it in the way it moved during sleep, small twitches, involuntary shudders, the body at war with something invisible. He did not know its biology, did not know its chemistry, did not know what it ate or breathed or needed. He had nothing but observation and instinct, and the willingness to stay awake. He noticed things. The creature flinched from certain air currents, but not others. Specifically the ones that came through the east window, where the evening air carried moisture from the creek. Dry air it tolerated, humid air made it tighten and turn away. He closed the east window, opened the west one, pointed a space heater at the table from 4 feet away, close enough to warm, far enough not to burn. The gray at the edges of its skin stopped spreading. Eli did not understand why. But he filed it away. By hour 22, the creature seized. The whole body went rigid. The silver skin turned the color of old bruises, mottled black and gray, like storm clouds crawling beneath the surface. The harmonic breathing became a single flat tone, high and thin, and its back arched off the table with a force that nearly threw it to the floor. Eli caught it, held it, one arm across its chest, one hand cradling the back of its head, the way he had held men through seizures in field hospitals that smelled like copper and diesel. He held it and talked, not words that meant anything, just sound, just a human voice at a low register, steady and present. I'm here. You're not alone. I'm right here. The seizure lasted 4 minutes. When it passed, the creature lay still. Its breathing was barely there. One faint note, then silence, then the note again, fading. Eli looked at the thing on his kitchen table. Alien. Dying. He got in his truck. The veterinary supply store in Missoula opened at 6. He was there at 5:40, sitting in the parking lot with the engine running and his hands on his knees. When the doors opened, he walked to the pharmaceutical section and bought 3 bottles of broad-spectrum antibiotics designed for livestock. The woman at the counter looked at the bottles, then at him, then at the bottles again. Got a sick horse? Something like that. He drove home at 20 miles over the speed limit and did the math in his head. Body weight, concentration, absorption rate. The math was wrong. He knew it was wrong. The creature was not a horse or a cow or any living thing this medicine was built for. But dying was also wrong, and of the 2 wrong things, he chose the one that had a chance. He mixed the antibiotic into boiled water and fed it to the creature with a plastic syringe, 1 slow drop at a time. It swallowed, coughed, swallowed again. Then he waited. Hour 31. The mottled black began to recede. Like watching a bruise heal in fast motion, the dark patches pulling back, silver flooding in behind them. The breathing found its second note again. 2 tones, unsteady, but 2. Eli put his face in his hands and sat like that for a long time. By day 3, the creature could sit up. Its wound was closing, faster than anything human, the tissue knitting together with a precision that made his field stitches look like a child's craft project. It peeled his sutures out with its long fingers, carefully, one by one, and set them on the table in a neat row. Then it looked at him. He brought it water, boiled, cooled, in the only clean mug he had, ceramic, chipped at the rim, with a faded logo from a feed store that had closed 2 years ago. Its fingers touched his. It did not pull away. Eli had spent enough time around hurt things to know what a wall coming down looked like. He had seen it in men who had gone days without letting anyone close. The moment where the body decides, before the mind does, that the nearby thing is safe. The creature was looking at him. Not with gratitude. Gratitude he understood. This was something else. This was the look of a mind encountering a thing it had no category for. It held his mug in its 2 long fingers, and it breathed in 2 tones, and it looked at him like he was a word that did not exist in its language. Outside, The Montana wind moved through the dead field, where something from another world had fallen, and the silence between them was not empty. On the fourth morning, Sayari woke to the smell of something burning in a way that was intentional. The human, Ellie, she had learned by pointing at things and trading sounds until names stuck, was standing at the heating unit in his food preparation area, doing something violent to animal protein in a flat metal pan. The smell was aggressive. It filled the entire structure. She had read in survey reports that humans applied extreme heat to organic matter before ingesting it, a practice the xenobiology department had classified as both unnecessary and mildly barbaric. It smelled extraordinary. She was sitting upright now. The wound across her torso had closed to a thin silver line. Her immune system had stabilized, not won exactly, but reached a working truce with this planet's microbial army. Both of these facts were because of the creature at the heating unit, who was now sliding the charred protein onto a flat ceramic disc and bringing it to her. "Bacon," he said, pointing at it. "Bayhen," she repeated. He made the expression where the lips pulled back and the teeth showed. She had spent 3 days calibrating her reaction to this display. Every Veltari instinct read it as a threat. Bared teeth meant dominance challenge, territorial aggression, the prelude to violence. But the expression always appeared when he was giving her things. Water, food, the soft fabric he had wrapped around her shoulders when her skin temperature dropped. The threat display meant kindness. She held this contradiction in her mind, like a stone she could not put down. She had been trying to understand him, not his language. Her translation implant was barely functional, catching one word in 30 and rendering it as static-laced fragments. Not his biology, although that fascinated her. The single heartbeat, the single-toned breathing, the absurd fragility of his thermal regulation. What she was trying to understand was the architecture of his motivation. In the Velthari Dominion, every action existed within a framework. Caste obligation, contractual debt, strategic positioning. Even kindness was transactional. You protected those whose survival benefited your lineage, your faction, your political standing. The mathematics of compassion were precise and well documented. Eli did not fit the mathematics. He owed her nothing. She held no authority over him, no claim, no leverage. He did not know what she was, a princess, a royal, a figure of political value. To him she was a bleeding thing in a crater, an unknown creature from an unknown place. Helping her actively endangered him. She had seen enough of this planet's information networks through the window of his vehicle to know that her presence here would cause chaos among his species. He had everything to lose and nothing to gain. And yet, he had held her through the seizure. She remembered that, not clearly, but in the body, the way you remember heat. His arm across her chest, his voice in the dark, low and constant. She had not understood the words. She had understood the staying. In Veltari there was no word for what he had done. The closest translation was Thelvori, a term from ancient legal code meaning unprompted sacrifice with no recoverable debt. It appeared in exactly one historical text. It was considered a theoretical concept. A logical impossibility. She was eating bacon with a theoretical impossibility. The sky changed at midday. Sayari felt it before she saw it. A vibration in the air, at a frequency below human hearing, but well within Velthari range. A resonance she knew in her bones. Ship drives. Velthari ship drives. Multiple signatures. She stood. Too fast. The wound protested. She gripped the edge of the table and looked at Eli, and for the first time since the crash, she felt something worse than fear. She felt fear for someone else. Eli saw her face change. He did not know what she was, could not read her features the way she could not read his smile, but he knew the look of a person hearing a sound that meant danger. He set down the pan. He moved to the window. The sky above the farm was filling with light. Not sunlight, structured light. Geometric, precise, the kind of light that moved with intent. 4 ships, Scout class, Velthari military configuration. They descended through the atmosphere in formation. Slow, controlled, the way predators approach when they know the prey cannot run. Sayari's translation implant caught a burst of encrypted communication. Military frequency. She parsed it in fragments. Princess located. Biological contamination protocol. Treaty enforcement. Sterilize contact. Sterilize contact. She knew what those words meant. She had grown up in the Dominion. She had sat in classrooms where the Treaty of Quiet Observation was taught as law and mercy combined. Quarantine as protection. Isolation as kindness. The humans were too fragile, too primitive, too unstable to survive contact with the wider galaxy. The Velthari were doing them a favor. And when contact occurred anyway, when a ship crashed, or a probe malfunctioned, or an explorer wandered too close, the protocol was clear. Remove all evidence. Restore the quarantine. If the human contact was brief, neurological wipe, memory erasure, clean and clinical. If the contact was prolonged, if the human had sustained exposure to Velthari biology, technology, language, the protocol upgraded. Termination. Eli had held her for 4 days, fed her, stitched her wound, held her through a seizure while her alien blood soaked into his clothes. There was no version of brief contact that covered what he had done. They would kill him. Commander Thalvek came through the farmhouse door with the precise calm of a man who had done this before. Tall, armored in light reactive plating that shifted color with his movements. Behind him, 4 soldiers. Behind them, the hum of a medical extraction team already setting up in the field. He saw Sayari, and his posture changed. Not relief, but the specific recalibration of a military officer whose mission parameters had just shifted from recovery to something more complicated. Then, he saw Eli. The human was standing between the kitchen table and the door. He had not moved to block it. He had not raised his hands or adopted any posture that could be read as aggressive. He was simply standing, present, grounded, occupying the space between the soldiers and the creature he had kept alive. Thalvek looked at the human, at the violet bloodstains on his shirt, at the medical supplies on the counter, at the makeshift UV sterilization rig built from welding equipment. He looked at all of it, and Sayari watched his jaw tighten as the scope of the contamination became clear. "Princess," he said, "the extraction team is prepared. We will depart within the hour." A pause. "The contact will be processed according to protocol." Sayari looked at Eli. He did not understand the words, but he understood Thalvek. Soldiers were soldiers in any language. The posture, the authority, the way the room rearranged itself around a man who had come to impose order. Eli did not move. "No," Sayari said. Thalvek's expression did not change. This was not a negotiation. "The treaty is clear, Princess. Prolonged biological contact with a quarantined species requires—" "I invoke the Kelthori claim." The room stopped. Thalvek stared at her. Behind him, one of the soldiers made an involuntary sound, a sharp intake of breath that betrayed training. The Kelthori claim, an ancient prerogative buried so deep in Velthari royal law that it had not been spoken aloud in living memory. It allowed a member of the blood, a direct descendant of a ruling queen, to place any sentient being under crown protection, removing them from military jurisdiction entirely. It was designed for political prisoners, for allies of the throne trapped behind enemy lines. It had never been invoked for an alien. "You cannot," Thalvek began. "I can. The legal framework permits the claim for any being classified as sentient. Check the statute. I will wait." He checked. She waited. The soldiers stood in the kitchen of a Montana farmhouse, and accessed 11,000-year-old royal law on their tactical displays, while the smell of bacon hung in the air. The statute permitted it. Thalvik looked at Sayari with something that was not quite anger and not quite respect, but lived in the narrow space between them. The claim routes authority to the Queen. Only she can adjudicate. I know. With the human. I know. If the Queen overrides the claim, the human dies. I know. Sayari turned to Eli. Her implant was barely working. She had 30 words of his language, learned through 4 days of pointing and repetition. She used them now. She pointed up, at the ships, at the sky. Come, she said, in his language. The word felt thick and simple in her mouth. She pointed at herself, then at him, then up again. Danger, she said. Another borrowed word. Come, with. Eli looked at her. He looked at the soldiers in his kitchen. He looked through the window at his farm. The dead fields, the broken fence, the land he had bought because he thought silence would fix him. 2 years of failed crops and failed everything else, held together by coffee and stubbornness and the particular endurance of a man who did not know how to stop trying. He looked at Sayari, at the thin silver scar where her wound had been, at the fear on her face that was not for herself. He walked to the door. On the ship, as the ground fell away and Montana became a brown square, and then a texture, and then nothing, Sayari stood beside him at the viewport. She said something in Veltari, low, almost to herself. Her implant caught one word and pushed it through the damaged translation matrix. It arrived in English, broken and flickering. Brave, or possibly broken. The implant could not tell the difference. Sayari was not sure she could either. The Velthari homeworld smelled like ozone and something floral that had no Earth equivalent. And Eli Marin walked through it like a man moving through a dream he had not agreed to have. Everything was too tall. The corridors of the orbital station were built for beings that averaged 7 feet, and the ceilings arched another 4 above that. And the light came from everywhere and nowhere at the same time, diffused through the walls themselves, as if the architecture was gently glowing. It made him feel short. It made him feel temporary. It made him feel like a typo in a document written in a language he could not read. They had given him clothes, neutral, gray, some kind of fabric that adjusted to his body temperature without being asked. His old shirt, the one with Sayari's violet blood dried into the cotton, had been taken. Confiscated. Evidence, probably. It had been proof that something real had happened. Guards walked on either side of him. They did not touch him. They did not speak to him. They looked at him the way museum visitors look at an exhibit that has been mislabeled, with interest that contained a question they were too polite to ask out loud. He smiled at one of them. The guard's hand went to its weapon. Sayari had warned him about the smiling. Through the now functional translation implant, repaired by Velthari technicians during the journey, so that her words arrived in English with only a faint harmonic echo, she had explained. When you show your teeth, she said, they see a predator. I'm being friendly. They do not know this word applied to teeth. What do they think I'm doing? Establishing dominance, threatening territorial violence, possibly preparing to bite. What about eye contact? Also a dominance challenge. What about standing with my arms crossed? Aggressive postural display. What am I supposed to do? Be smaller. He looked down at her from his 5'11", short by Velthari standards, but he was built like something designed for a gravity well, broad and dense and heavy-boned, in a way that read as armored to their eyes. His resting heart rate was slower than theirs. His body temperature was higher. His pupils did not dilate when he was afraid. Everything about his biology projected calm. The Velthari read calm as confidence. They read confidence in an alien species as a threat level they did not have a protocol for. He was a 5'11" panic attack, walking through their capital, and he did not even know it. The Velthari Senate convened in a chamber that looked like the inside of a cathedral designed by mathematicians. The ceiling curved upward into darkness. Light columns rose from the floor, each one representing a star system, arranged in the exact configuration of the Dominion's territory. 9,000 pillars of light. Eli walked between them and tried not to touch anything. 12 senators sat in a curved formation. They were old. He could tell, not from their faces, which were smooth and silver and unreadable, but from the weight of their attention. They looked at him the way rocks look at weather, patient, dense, unmoved by anything that might pass. Sayari sat in the gallery above. She had been separated from him for the hearing. Protocol, Thalvek had said. The accused and the claimant could not occupy the same space during evaluation. Eli was not sure if he was the accused. The senior senator spoke. The translation arrived in his earpiece a half-second behind the original, creating a strange doubling effect. The Veltari harmonic first, then the flat English meaning trailing after it like a shadow. Human, you are here because Princess Sayari Velthon has invoked the Keltori claim on your behalf, placing you under crown protection and asserting that your life holds value to the Dominion. This body must evaluate that assertion. Do you understand? Yes. You found the princess in a damaged vessel on your world. You provided medical aid over a period of 4 days. You had no obligation to do so. No treaty, no prior contact, no knowledge of who she was or what she represented. Is this correct? Yes. Why did you help her? The question landed in the chamber like a coin dropped in a well. 12 senators waited. 9,000 light columns hummed. She was hurt, Eli said. I was there. Eli did not provide more. The silence extended. You must understand, the senator said, that in Velthari jurisprudence, an action requires a framework. Obligation, debt, strategic interest, caste duty. Your statement provides none of these. You are describing an action without a cause. The cause was that she was hurt. That is a condition, not a motivation. Eli thought about this. He thought about the field, the crater, the thing inside the pod that was silver and bleeding and breathing wrong. He thought about his hands reaching for the wound before his brain caught up. Where I come from, he said, you don't need a reason to help someone. You need a reason not to. In the gallery above, Sayari closed her eyes. The political fractures spread faster than Sayari had anticipated. Word of the Kelthari claim had traveled across 9,000 systems in a matter of hours. Every faction in the Dominion had an opinion, and every opinion was loud. The traditionalists called it desecration. The claim was sacred law, designed for Velthari citizens, not for primitives from quarantined worlds. To extend it to a human was to dilute the very concept of crown protection. Senator Veldoth, the oldest voice in the chamber, called it the most reckless act of royal privilege in living memory, and demanded the claim be struck. The reformists saw an opening. If a human was capable of the kind of behavior Eli had demonstrated, unprompted, non-transactional, self-endangering compassion, then the Category 6 classification was wrong. And if the classification was wrong, the quarantine was legally indefensible. And if the quarantine was indefensible, then the Dominion had been violating its own ethical codes for centuries. The military wanted the whole thing to disappear. Thalvek filed his report with the clinical precision of a man who understood that precision was his only defense. The human had been contained. The contact was documented. The claim complicated extraction. He recommended the Queen adjudicate and close the matter. Sayari navigated all of it. She had spent her life watching politics from the edges. The third daughter, the academic, the one who studied small things while her older sisters studied power. She had never been a player. Now she was the center of the board, and she discovered something that surprised her. She was good at it. Not because she was cunning, because she was precise. She knew the law better than the senators who enforced it. She had read the Kelthori statutes out of academic curiosity years before she ever imagined invoking them. She could cite precedent, and she could stand in front of powerful men and not flinch, because she had spent her entire life being overlooked by powerful men, and the invisibility had taught her to watch them without being watched in return. She had always been the observer. Now the observation was a weapon. The assassination attempt came on the third night. Eli was in the quarters they had assigned him, a room with no windows, no sharp objects, and a door that locked from the outside. Comfortable, expensive, a prison that smelled like flowers. The operative entered through the ventilation system. Velthari, trained, fast, armed with a neural disruptor, a weapon designed to stop a Velthari heart in a single pulse. Eli was not Velthari. What happened next was captured by palace surveillance and reviewed by 17 different intelligence analysts in the following hours. Eli was on his feet before the operative's second foot touched the floor. Not because he was faster, but because his threat response did not require conscious processing. It lived in the spine, in the muscle memory of a body that had been trained in places where the interval between sleeping and fighting was measured in fractions of a second. He moved into the operative, not away, into. He closed the distance before the disruptor could be aimed, stripped it from the operative's grip with a wrist lock that used the attacker's own momentum as leverage, and put the operative on the ground in a controlled hold. 3 seconds, start to finish. The surveillance footage circulated through the court like a virus. 17 analysts watched a Category 6 primitive, a species classified as fragile, unstable, and biologically limited, dismantle a trained Velthari operative with a calm efficiency that looked less like combat and more like maintenance, semi-sentient, quarantined for their own protection. The footage made liars of every word. The summons came for Sayari alone, not Eli, not the Senate. Her mother wanted her daughter. Queen Moren's private chamber was smaller than the throne hall, quieter. The light here was warm, amber, not the clinical white of the public spaces. Sayari had been in this room only a handful of times. Each time, it had smelled of her mother's tea. It smelled of it now. The queen was seated. She was always seated. The chair was not a throne, just a chair. But when Moren sat in something, it became a throne through sheer force of presence. She looked at her daughter. 400 years of rule lived in that gaze. Wars, extinctions, first contacts with species that had already built structures around their stars. She had seen everything. She was not impressible. "What is he?" she asked. One question, no title, no protocol. A mother asking her daughter about the strange creature she had dragged home. Sayari stood in the warm light of the room where she had once, as a child, fallen asleep on the floor while her mother worked. She thought about Eli's hands on her wound, about the mug with the chipped rim, about the 4 days in a farmhouse that smelled like coffee and silence. "He is what we were afraid of," she said. The queen said nothing. The tea cooled. The amber light hummed. The silence between a mother and a daughter filled with everything that would happen next. The throne hall of Velthar was built to make living things feel small. 9,000 holographic suns orbited the ceiling in a slow, silent procession, one for each star system in the Dominion, arranged in precise astronomical configuration. They cast light that shifted and moved, so that shadows in the hall were never still. The floor was a single piece of polished mineral, dark as deep water, and it reflected the suns above, so that anyone walking across it appeared to be walking through space itself. At the far end, on a raised dais of black stone, sat the throne, and in the throne sat Queen Mo-Ren. She was still, the kind of stillness that large things achieve. Mountains, oceans, the deep gravity of old stars. Her skin was darker silver than her daughter's, almost pewter, and the lines of her face held the particular architecture of someone who had been making decisions for 4 centuries and had stopped flinching from them long ago. The hall was full. Every senator, every faction leader, every military commander and diplomatic envoy and political observer with enough rank to claim a place. They stood in tiered galleries that rose on either side of the central aisle. Hundreds of Veltari, silent, watching. The holographic suns moved above them, and their shadows turned like the hands of slow clocks. Eli Marin entered from the far door. They had dressed him in the same gray diplomatic garb. It fit him well enough. He walked the length of the central aisle with the gait of a man who had walked across worse ground. Not confident exactly, but settled into his own body in a way that did not apologize for the space it occupied. He did not kneel, not out of defiance. No one had told him to. The Veltari did not kneel. They bowed, a precise inclination of the torso calibrated to the rank differential between the two parties. No one had taught him the bow. No one had explained the protocol. He simply walked to the designated point, a circle of lighter stone set into the dark floor, 20 paces from the dais, and stopped. He stood there, a man from Montana, 5'11", one heart, one tone to his breathing, warm-blooded, slow-healing, short-lived by any Veltari measure, the most fragile thing in the room by several orders of magnitude. Every eye in the hall was on him. The Queen spoke. "You are the human." Her voice carried without amplification. It filled the hall the way water fills a glass, completely, without effort. The translation reached Eli's earpiece a half-beat later. "Yes, ma'am." A ripple through the galleries, not at the word, at the tone. He had addressed the ruler of 9,000 star systems the way he might address a woman at a grocery store. The lack of reverence was so total that it circled past insult and arrived somewhere near innocence. Mohern's expression did not change. "My daughter tells me you saved her life." "I helped. She did most of the surviving herself." "The Senate has reviewed your testimony. You stated that your motivation was—" She paused, and the pause had the quality of someone tasting a word they found strange. "That she was hurt, and you were there." "That's right. This body has spent 3 days attempting to locate the framework for your actions within Veltari jurisprudence. Obligation, debt, strategic advantage, caste duty. Your actions map to none of these. No, ma'am. You knew nothing about her species, her rank, her value. You could not communicate. You risked contamination from her biology. You spent your own resources, medical supplies, fuel, time. You endangered yourself. When my military arrived, you boarded their ship and left your planet. You have no guarantee of return. You have no guarantee of survival." She leaned forward, 1 inch. In 400 years of rule, witnesses would later say they had never seen her lean. For what? Ellie was quiet for a moment. The suns turned above him. His shadow moved on the dark floor. "I've been thinking about how to answer that," he said. "Because you keep asking and I keep giving the same answer, and it doesn't seem to fit the way you need it to." He paused. The hall held its breath. "Where I come from, there's no system for it, no law that says you have to stop when someone's hurt. No code, no framework like you said. Most people just do. You see someone in trouble, and your hands move before you think about it. You don't calculate what you're owed. You don't check if they're worth it. You just—" He opened his hands, a gesture so human that the translators could not touch it. "Help, and then you go home." He looked at the Queen, direct eye contact. Every Veltari in the hall read it as a challenge. Eli did not know this. He was just looking at the person he was talking to. You don't need a reason to help someone. You need a reason not to. The hall's environmental systems recorded it. A measurable absence of sound across 400 Veltari respiratory systems. Several had entered involuntary apnea. Their bodies had forgotten to breathe. Sayari stepped forward. She was standing in the gallery reserved for the royal bloodline, a raised platform at the right hand of the throne. To speak from it during a queen's judgment was a violation of protocol so severe that Commander Thalvek, standing at the base of the dais, physically flinched. A princess did not interrupt. A princess did not speak unless addressed. A princess especially did not step to the railing of the royal gallery and look down at the hall with eyes that held no apology. Sayari did all of these things. Mother, the harmonic of her voice carried through the hall. Not amplified, not projected, just a daughter's voice reaching for her mother across 20 paces of dark stone and 4 centuries of power. He saved my life. 4 words. No legal argument. No citation of the Kelthori statutes she knew better than the senators who debated them. No invocation of treaty reform or category reclassification, or the political implications of human sentience. She stripped all of it away. A daughter talking to her mother. The simplest sentence in any language. Queen Morin looked at her daughter. She looked for a long time. The suns turned above them, and the shadows moved, and the hall waited, with the particular tension of a room that knows it is witnessing something that will be remembered. Then the queen placed her hands on the arms of the throne. In the galleries, someone inhaled sharply. It was the loudest thing in the room. Morin pressed down. She rose. The queen of the Veltari Dominion stood. 11,000 years of iconography said she did not do this. Every painting, every sculpture, every holographic record of every queen who had ever ruled showed the same thing. The sovereign seated, the universe in order, the throne occupied, and the matter settled. Standing meant the universe was unsettled. Standing meant something existed that the throne could not contain. No queen had ever stood for an alien species. The historical record was absolute. There was no precedent, no framework, no category for what was happening. Morin descended the dais steps. Each step was deliberate. Each step was a choice made in full view of every faction, every senator, every officer and diplomat who would spend the next century debating what it meant. She crossed the hall floor. The reflected suns slid beneath her feet. She walked to the circle of light, where Eli Marin stood, a man from a dead farm on a quarantined world who had pulled a princess from a crater because that was what you did when someone was hurt and you were there. She stopped before him. She raised her hand and placed it flat against his chest, over his heart. One rhythm, no harmonic, the simplest engine in the galaxy, beating inside the dumbest, bravest animal the Dominion had ever failed to understand. The Veltha Soring, the acknowledgement of equal standing, reserved for fellow monarchs and beings to whom the Dominion owed a debt beyond repayment. Performed perhaps 30 times in 11,000 years, never for a species outside the Dominion, never for a human, until now. Eli did not move. He did not understand the gesture. He felt the pressure of her hand on his chest, and he stood still, because a lifetime of instinct told him that when something important was happening, you let it happen. The Queen spoke. Her voice was transmitted simultaneously to every system in the Dominion. 9,000 suns, 9,000 worlds, recorded and archived in every language the translation matrices could render. The Dominion owes this man a debt it did not believe his species capable of creating. We were wrong. Let the record show. We were wrong. The quarantine did not dissolve overnight. Politics moved at the speed of politics. Months of debate, years of reclassification, decades of rewriting the treaties and taxonomies and legal codes that had kept an entire species sealed behind glass. But it began here, in this hall, with a queen on her feet and her hand on a human heart. The reformists cited it. The traditionalists fought it. The military adapted to it with the grim efficiency of soldiers who recognized a new reality when it stood before them. The Category 6 classification was struck from the record. The Xenobiology Department published a revised assessment of human cognitive and emotional capacity. It was 400 pages long. The summary was one sentence. Previous models were insufficient. Sayari did not become an ambassador. She became the head of the first Velthari Human Contact Commission, because she was the only person in the Dominion who had lived the thing everyone else was theorizing about. She was precise. She was fierce. She carried the authority of a woman who had lain on a kitchen table in Montana and been saved by a man who used livestock medicine because it was the only wrong thing available that had a chance of being right. Ellie went home. He did not accept a title or a rank or a position in any structure that required him to be something other than what he was. He flew back to Earth on a Veltari diplomatic vessel that landed in his south field, in the same crater where the pod had hit. He walked across the dead soil to his farmhouse and opened the door, and the kitchen still smelled faintly of bacon and iodine. Sayari visited, not often, through official channels, legal ones now, documented and approved, the first sanctioned Veltari human contact in history. She brought him something on her third visit, a plant, Veltari, a species engineered for hostile biomes, designed to pull nutrients from soil that had nothing left to give. She set it in his hands. For the field, she said. He planted it where the crater was, the dead soil, the place where something had fallen from the sky, and he had walked toward it instead of away. It grew. Roots first, then a pale stem, then leaves that caught the Montana light and held it in colors that did not belong to this world. Silver and violet and a blue that had no name in English. It grew, and the dead field grew around it. And Eli Marin stood on his porch in the evening and watched the light move through leaves that should not have existed, and thought about a night when he had held a stranger through a seizure and talked into the dark, because that was all he had. His hands, his voice, the staying,